I'm okay. It was much more emotional than I thought, and I found it very hard to speak outside the court.
I like it because I know one thing for certain is that if you do get married, you must commit yourself to that. Cliff Richard loved one woman for 50 years. She married his best friend instead, then married someone else, then died in his arms. He never married anyone, never had children, just kept singing while hiding the biggest heartbreak in British music history. When police raided his home in 2014, they weren't the first to destroy him. The BBC had already made a secret deal. The allegations were lies, but the damage was real. He lost weight. He got shingles. He couldn't sleep. He said his own home felt contaminated. The man who once filled Wembley Stadium was now afraid to leave his house. On October 14th, 1940, in King George's Hospital, like now, British India, Harry Roger Webb came into a world already shaking under the weight of war and revolution. World War II was raging. Indian independence protests were boiling over. In 1946, riots exploded during Direct Action Day, and British families began fleeing the colony. Among them were the Webbs. Harry's father worked in the colonial system, but by 1948, it was clear the empire was collapsing, so they left. Not in a car or a plane, but on a slow, packed ship crossing the Indian Ocean. The SS Ranchi was their lifeboat. For 3 long weeks, it carried hundreds of British families, all leaving the only home they'd known. They went from servants and sunshine to rationing and gray skies. England was cold and still recovering from the war. The Webbs ended up in a small house in Carshalton, Surrey. Gone were the big rooms and warm evenings. It was a rough start for a boy who had once lived with comfort, but it toughened him. That journey planted something inside him, a need to prove himself, to make something bigger out of this strange new life. And soon, Harry Webb disappeared. A man named Harry Greaterax was watching closely. He managed talent and had an eye for trends. He told Harry, "You need a name that sounds like rock." "Cliff," he suggested. "Strong, British, solid, like a cliff face." Then came Richard, a tribute to Little Richard, the wild American rock star. Harry Webb was gone. Cliff Richard was born. He didn't just change his name, he changed British music. On August 29th, 1958, a song called Move It came out. It sounded raw, loud, and rebellious. Nothing like the clean, polite pop of the time. Cliff was only 18. The song hit #2 on the UK charts and set off a shockwave. For the first time, British teenagers had their own rock star. He wasn't copying America. He was creating something new. That one song opened the door for everyone who followed. The Beatles, the Stones, and beyond. But it wasn't just the music. It was the mania. When Cliff went on tour that same year, Britain went mad. Girls screamed, cried, and fainted. Boys hated him for stealing the spotlight. Security guards couldn't hold the crowds back. It was Elvis-level chaos. But this was in London, Manchester, and Leeds. It had never happened here before. They called it Cliff hysteria. The newspapers loved it. So did the record labels. In 1959, the madness doubled. Cliff released Living Doll. He didn't even want to. He thought the song was too soft, too fake. "I hated it," he told his producer. But the band changed it to a slow, country-style ballad. It hit #1 and stayed there for 6 weeks, selling 770,000 copies. He got a silver disc in November. By January, he had a gold. Then came Travelin' Light, another #1. 5 more weeks on top. Between the two, Cliff sold over 1 million records. No one else in Britain had done that before. Hollywood came calling. In 1959, Cliff appeared in a dark, dramatic film called Serious Charge. It wasn't lighthearted. It dealt with homosexuality, false accusations, and heavy moral questions. Cliff was only 19, and it shocked everyone that he signed on. A year later, he starred in Espresso Bongo, a satirical film that poked fun at the music industry. With these roles, Cliff made it clear he wasn't just a teen idol. He wanted to act, to grow, to be more than a singer. British pop stars had never done that before. Then came Summer Holiday. On January 10th, 1963, the film premiered in London. 3,000 fans flooded Leicester Square. Cliff couldn't even get out of his car. That night, he missed his own premiere. But it didn't matter. The soundtrack hit #1 on the UK albums chart before the film even hit theaters nationwide. It stayed there for 14 straight weeks. Multiple songs from the film reached #1 the next time. Bachelor Boy, Summer Holiday, even The Shadows' instrumental, Foot Tapper, topped the charts. The movie was the second biggest British box office hit of 1963, just behind From Russia with Love. And in that same year, Cliff was voted the most popular film star in the UK. But then came the Beatles. Most assumed Cliff would be swept aside. Yet in 1964, right in the heart of Beatlemania, Cliff released 6 top 10 hits. The Beatles only managed 5. His songs, like Constantly, On the Beach, and I Could Easily Fall, In Love with You, kept him in the spotlight. Even when the Beatles were revolutionizing music and storming America, Cliff was holding his ground at home. The battle was real. His movie, Summer Holiday, and the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night, clashed at cinemas across the country. Both broke records, but British audiences hadn't forgotten who had come first. Even Paul McCartney admitted it. He once said that the Beatles left for Hamburg because Cliff had everything sewn up in Britain. And John Lennon said it plainly, before Cliff Richard and Move It. There was nothing worth listening to in England. In 1965, something truly unexpected happened. New Musical Express held a global readers' poll. Fans were asked to pick the world's top male singer. Cliff beat Elvis. He beat Lennon. He beat McCartney. That year, the Beatles released Help! And Rubber Soul. Elvis was still selling out everywhere, but Cliff won. Why? Because even with the world changing around him, Cliff kept evolving. He didn't try to be the Beatles. He didn't chase trends. He balanced pop ballads, faith-friendly films, and genuine charm. He was consistent, and for fans around the world, that mattered. He was their rock before the British invasion and long after it. In June 1966, something happened that no one in the music world saw coming. At Earl's Court, Cliff Richard walked out onto the stage, not to sing, but to stand beside American evangelist Billy Graham and tell thousands of people that he had become a Christian. This wasn't just a quiet personal decision. It was a bold public testimony broadcast across the country. Fans who knew him as a British version of Elvis or Little Richard were left stunned. Some cried, others just stood in disbelief. The man they loved for his rebellious energy had taken a turn they never expected. But this moment wasn't random. It was the end of a spiritual journey that had started 2 years earlier. Still, doing it in front of Billy Graham's massive audience, right in the middle of the swinging 60s, gave it a level of seriousness no one could ignore. Rock stars in that era weren't supposed to talk about God. They were meant to rebel, push limits, and break rules. Cliff's announcement went against everything the culture thought a pop icon should be. Almost immediately, people panicked. Some fans thought it was the end of his music career. Industry insiders whispered that he might quit and become a teacher. That idea wasn't far off. Cliff himself considered leaving the stage behind for good. He thought maybe he couldn't be a proper Christian and stay in the spotlight. Music magazines began speculating who would take his place. Booking agents backed off. The industry believed that you couldn't be both spiritual and a star. And for a while, Cliff wasn't sure either. But then, something changed. Cliff didn't disappear. He stayed, and by doing so, he created something brand new. He didn't drop his fate, and he didn't quit music. Instead, he found a way to combine the two. He became the first major UK pop star to openly live his faith while staying in the charts. Nobody had done that before. Not like this. He proved you didn't have to pick one life over the other. You could be honest about your beliefs and still fill concert halls. This choice wasn't just career survival. It changed who he was. Cliff later admitted that his rock and roll image had been fake. He wasn't confident. He was just pretending. But after becoming a Christian, that changed. He said, "My confidence grew. My attitude changed. It wasn't important to be right all the time." The pressure to play a role disappeared. He felt free to be real. That new confidence helped him perform better, even as the Beatles and Merseybeat acts dominated the charts. While others tried to keep up, Cliff grew stronger because he finally felt like himself. But by the mid-70s, Cliff's career hit a low. In 1975, for the first time, he didn't have a single song in the charts. People were starting to think his time was over. Then came Devil Woman, released in April 1976. The song was loud, edgy, and darker than anything he'd done before. It told a strange story about a psychic, a curse, and a stray cat. But more importantly, it rocked. It hit number 9 in the UK and number 6 in the US. His first top 10 in America. It sold over 2 million copies. Cliff was back. Even more shocking, the hard rock crowd embraced him. Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, and Elton John were spotted wearing I'm Nearly Famous badges supporting his comeback album. These were guitar legends showing public respect for a man who'd once been seen as clean-cut and outdated. One music critic even compared Cliff's new album to Marvin Gaye's best work. This wasn't just a comeback, it was a full transformation. The kid from the 50s was now being hailed as a serious rock artist. He didn't stop there. In 1987, over 25 years into his career, Cliff released Always Guaranteed, a modern pop album that avoided the cheesy synths of the decade and sounded timeless. Inspired by Thriller, he teamed up again with Alan Tarney. The result? A platinum-selling record. It reached number 5 in the UK, stayed there for 24 weeks, and sold over 3 million copies. 4 singles from the album broke into the UK top 40. Some people even went silver, selling 250,000 copies. Cliff proved that even in the late 80s, he could compete with the best. Then came Christmas 1988. Cliff released Mistletoe and Wine, a gentle, faith-filled holiday song. He recorded it with tinsel hanging over the mic in the middle of summer. The single debuted at number 7, shot to number 1 the next week, and stayed there for 4 straight weeks. It sold 750,000 copies in 6 weeks and became the year's biggest UK single, outperforming U2, Kylie Minogue, and Phil Collins. By 2024, it had gone platinum and was still earning $100,000 a year in royalties. Even decades later, people couldn't get enough of it. But one of the most impressive moments came in May 1989. Cliff released his 100th single. No other British artist had ever done that. To mark the occasion, he invited 2,000 fans to the London Palladium. He played them 6 unreleased tracks and asked them to vote. The song that came in second, The Best of Me, was the one he chose. It peaked at number 2 in the UK and earned silver certification. It also charted internationally. Number 2 in Ireland, 25 in New Zealand, and 59 in Australia. It wasn't just about hitting 100. It was about staying relevant while the industry changed again and again. Cliff Richard's concert at Wembley Stadium in June 1989 wasn't just another show. It was a full-blown spectacle. They called it The Event, and it lived up to that name. Wembley was packed. Thousands poured in to witness something more than music. It was a time machine. The first half of the concert brought back the 1950s, with Cliff paying tribute to the TV show Oh Boy, the same show that launched his career in 1958. Cliff didn't perform alone. He brought on the Vernon's Girls, the Dallas Boys, the Kalin Twins, acts that once ruled British rock and roll. For the fans in the crowd, it felt like stepping into a living jukebox. Then the second half kicked in. That's when Cliff showed why he wasn't just a nostalgia act. He performed his more recent hits with a confidence that could only come from someone who had conquered the charts for decades. Cameras were rolling. The concert was professionally filmed and later released as a live album and TV special. This wasn't just a gig. It was a carefully crafted historic moment. That same year, 1989, Cliff received the biggest honor the Bright Awards could give, the Outstanding Contribution to Music. But it wasn't just about a trophy. It marked something bigger. He had become the only singer in history to land number 1 hits in 5 straight decades. The 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and now the 90s. He had already released 100 singles by then. The Best of Me was the 100th, and it hit the charts like a bullet. At that point, Cliff had 65 top 10 hits and 14 number 1s. No one else came close. A year later, on June 30th, 1990, another huge moment came. Nebworth Park, a massive charity concert to support the Nordhoff Robbins Music Therapy charity. Cliff performed with the Shadows, but they were just one part of a legendary lineup. Paul McCartney, Elton John, Pink Floyd, Eric Clapton, Genesis, and Phil Collins all took the stage. Rain poured when Tears for Fears opened, but the crowd stayed, soaked and singing. Cliff stood beside rock's biggest names and proved, once again, he belonged. Then came December 1990. A new song hit the airwaves, Savior's Day. It was written in October 1989 by Chris Eaton, who pitched it to Cliff at a Christmas party in a Rolls-Royce. Cliff listened to the demo right there in the car and said, "This is a number 1. He was right. It entered the charts at number 6 on December 8th, then climbed to number 3, then number 2. On December 23rd, it hit number 1, knocking Ice Ice Baby off the top. The video, shot at Dirt Door in Swanage in sunny September, showed people in full winter gear, sweating while pretending it was Christmas. But the result was magical. The momentum didn't stop. Around that time, Cliff released Private Collection, 1917-1988, a greatest hits album. It sold over 1.2 million copies, multi-platinum. It became the biggest album of his career. Songs like We Don't Talk Anymore, which sold nearly 5 million copies worldwide, kept his name echoing through every radio in Britain. This wasn't just nostalgia. He was outselling new pop stars. He was leading the charge in a fast-changing industry. But then, things took a strange turn. In 1999, Cliff released The Millennium Prayer. Mainstream radio didn't like it. BBC Radio 2 refused to playlist it. They said it didn't have broad appeal. But they were still playing Tina Turner and Cher, both Cliff's age. Radio 1 had already dropped older acts like the Beatles. Virgin Radio's Chris Evans once said Cliff was too old. DJs had to get special permission to play the song. Fans were furious. Cliff's fan club even protested outside the BBC. It felt like the industry had turned its back on him. But then came the miracle. Without a major label, without airplay, without the machine behind him, The Millennium Prayer went to number 1. Not for 1 week. 3. from November 28th to December 19th, 1999. It was his 14th UK #1, and it came 40 years after his first. Fans bought multiple copies. Churches supported it. It wasn't just a hit, it was a protest. Cliff had beaten the system. And it didn't just work in the UK. In Australia and New Zealand, the song reached #2. In Europe, it cracked the top 20 in several countries. 3 nations gave it platinum status. No major radio play, no heavy promotion. Just people who believed in the song. It raised serious money for the Children's Promise charity. Cliff had proved you could have faith, raise funds, and still top the charts. Away from the music, Cliff's personal life had its own storylines, some of them heartbreaking. In 1971, on his TV show It's Cliff Richard, he invited a young Australian singer named Olivia Newton-John to perform. She was 22. The chemistry between them was instant. Cliff later said, "I knew right away she was a for life." He wasn't wrong. They stayed close for more than 50 years. But what the world didn't know until Cliff's 2020 autobiography was that he had fallen in love with her. He wrote, "When I and many of us were in love with Olivia, she was engaged to someone else. I lost my chance. Cliff never married. And it seemed Olivia had left a mark that never faded." He added that everyone who knew her eventually fell for her. What made this story even more tangled was who she was engaged to. Bruce Welch, Cliff's own bandmate from the Shadows. Olivia met Bruce in 1968 when she was the opening act. Their relationship was explosive from the start. Bruce was still married. Their affair made headlines. They were engaged for 5 years, but never made it to the altar. All the while, Olivia was working closely with Cliff, touring with him, singing beside him. When she finally left Bruce in 1973, he fell into depression and even self-harmed. Rumors swirled. Had she fallen for Cliff instead? No one ever said out loud, but the silence was deafening. Despite the emotional storm, Cliff and Olivia kept performing together. For over 40 years, they sang duets that fans still remember. Their 1980 hit, Suddenly from Xanadu, was just one of many. They also performed When I'm 64 and other classics in live shows. Their voices blended so naturally that Cliff often said, "Olivia had a kind of grace no one else could match." Their final duet happened in October 2015 during Cliff's 75th birthday concert at Royal Albert Hall. They sang Suddenly one last time. When Cliff released his 2023 album, Cliff with Strings, My Kinda Life, he used that live recording as a tribute to Olivia. Then came the hardest part. 3 weeks before Olivia died, Cliff called her. She was upbeat, warm, cheerful as always. "Good day, Cliff. How are you, darling?" she said. She didn't sound like someone about to die. Cliff later wrote, "I never thought for one moment of that call that I'd be writing this." Olivia had battled breast cancer for 30 years. She was a fighter, but she never let her pain show. When she passed on August 8th, 2022, Cliff was crushed. "I hate that word," he said, referring to death. Instead, he said she had simply stopped living. It was his way of coping with the silence she left behind. On August 14th, 2014, Cliff Richard was relaxing at his place in Portugal when he turned on the TV. What he saw made his heart stop. Live on screen, helicopters were circling above his home in Berkshire, and police officers were going through his personal belongings. His first thought was simple but chilling. They looked like burglars, but this wasn't a robbery. It was a full-blown police raid, televised across the globe thanks to a secret deal between the BBC and South Yorkshire Police. The BBC had been tipped off ahead of time. They even called it internally the money shot. They wanted drama. They got it, and Cliff Richard got destroyed. He was 77 at the time, a national icon with a clean record and decades of service in the music world. Now, he was on his knees in the kitchen, sobbing. The images were everywhere, from the UK to Australia. During his court testimony, Cliff cried as he read out the list of countries that had broadcast footage of his private life being torn apart. He later said the stress made him feel like he was going to have a heart attack or stroke. All of this started from one allegation. A man in his 40s claimed that back in 1985, Cliff had assaulted him during a Billy Graham rally at Bromall Lane Stadium. That rally wasn't a small event. Over 5 nights, 200,000 people attended. Cliff had taken the stage with Graham, supporting the Christian cause he had championed since 1966. But the accusation fell apart fast. The man described a room with sports equipment where the alleged assault happened. The problem? That room didn't even exist in 1985. And the sports gear? Stored somewhere else entirely. Still, the police spent 22 months chasing this. They ignored statements from their own officers who were assigned to guard Cliff that night. Officers who were by his side the entire time. And they weren't even interviewed. The entire investigation dragged on for nearly 2 years. Cost taxpayers $800,000 and led to 0 charges. Nothing. Not one, but the damage was already done. As if the live raid and endless headlines weren't enough, the BBC then submitted their coverage for Scoop of the Year. Yes, while Cliff was still under investigation, the broadcaster entered the raid footage into an award competition. That decision alone earned the BBC an extra $20,000 in aggravated damages later. The court called it arrogant and humiliating. Behind the scenes, the human toll kept rising. Cliff later revealed he slipped into depression. Some days he couldn't sleep. Other days he couldn't even raise his arms. He developed shingles. He lost weight. He fell down from exhaustion. He said he felt like his house had been contaminated. He stopped feeling safe in his home. Even basic things like releasing an album or promoting his book became impossible. Everything stopped. Because the world saw him not as a man, but as a headline. And then came one of the strangest moments of all. Right after the raid aired, a man tried to blackmail Cliff. He demanded money and threatened to spread lies unless he was paid off. That man was arrested, but bizarrely, his original sex abuse claim was still taken seriously in the investigation. So here we had someone who tried to extort Cliff using the raid, and he was still treated as a credible victim. Eventually, Cliff received $400,000 in damages from South Yorkshire Police, who admitted that what they did, tipping off the BBC, was unlawful. They apologized publicly, but apologies don't erase trauma, nor do legal payouts, even when they reach into the millions. And they did. By the end of it all, the BBC had spent nearly $2 million in legal costs, on top of the damages paid to Cliff. Still, Cliff wasn't satisfied with the way prosecutors worded their decision. The CPS said there was insufficient evidence to bring charges. But to Cliff, that wasn't enough. He wanted it on record. There was no evidence, not a shred. The suggestion that something might still be there, that cloud of suspicion, was what haunted him most. He said, "I feel I've been smeared, not by the police, but by the BBC." In court, he broke down again, as he described that fear of being forever tainted. Even though he was cleared, even though he had done nothing wrong, he told MPs that being named publicly had ruined how he looked people in the eye. That no matter what, the damage had been done. People would always wonder. He had every reason to think that. His name had been plastered across front pages. His face was shown while police removed evidence that turned out to mean nothing. His life's work had been reduced to one raid, one rumor, and a media circus. In July 2018, he won his case against the BBC. The judge ruled that Cliff had a reasonable expectation of privacy, and that the BBC had violated it in a serious, sensationalist way. That ruling changed how British media could report police investigations from then on. But for Cliff, it was never about just winning. It was about survival, about telling the world that what happened to him wasn't just unfair. It was inhumane. He never got the 2 years of his life back. He never got to erase the headlines, or the stares, or the feeling that his name, no matter how clean, would always carry a shadow